Keir Starmer has declared Labour is back after the party held on by a hair at Batley and Spen by-election. The Labour leader was in West Yorkshire to celebrate Kim Leadbeater's narrow 323 vote win. So we saw Sir Keir wearing his England shirt in the pub yesterday, but is it coming home for Labour, Tom?
Well, if we look at the context of this by-election win for Labour, and it was a win, it was a disappointment for the Conservatives because they were expected to take the seat, but a Labour majority of 4,000 was reduced to a Labour majority of 323. Now, if that were reflected across the country, Labour would go backwards on its 2019 result, and its 2019 result was the worst result for the Labour Party since 1935. So this isn't the Labour Party building up from that result, it's going backwards from that result. This isn't Labour gaining a seat, it's retaining a seat, but with a smaller margin than it did in the worst result it has had for almost 100 years. Obviously the optics are good for Keir Starmer because everyone expected him to do even worse, but I'm not sure celebrating just doing badly is all that much to shout about.
Yeah, it's almost more like relief, I think, from Keir Starmer than anything else.
Well, you can see that in the picture we've got on screen at the moment. That looks like relief in his face.
Yeah, it does. It does. Paul, you know, your party held on to the seat, but it wasn't exactly a great triumph, was it?
No, it wasn't. There's no cause for celebration. Opposition parties which have not won general elections for 16 years and have just managed to hold on to a seat which they have held for a long time. You know, and they've really clung on to this one. It was a squeak. There's no cause to start popping champagne corks, and particularly as in this case, when that's come on the back of the Hartlepool defeat, which was bad enough. And, you know, my fear as a Labour person is what some people in the upper echelons of the party are now going to do is to make the same mistake that the Corbynites made after the general election in 2017, where an outcome that wasn't as disastrous as they thought it was going to be is now portrayed as some sort of great victory, and all is fine. We're moving in the right direction. You know, just carry on this path. And what that means is that actually the real problems in the Labour Party will not be confronted, and you know the problems are masked basically. So I think there are real big underlying problems in the Labour Party. I think that, you know, anyone who takes any solace from this and thinks that this is the first brick in rebuilding the Red Wall, I think is very, very sorely mistaken. There needs to be an internal revolution in the Labour Party, and until that happens, we're not going to win these people back across the country.
Well, there on the screen, we can see the results, and we see the person who came in third, George Galloway for the Workers' Party, got 8,000 votes. Paul, how many of those do you think he took from the Labour Party?
I suspect quite a few. I suspect maybe the majority, but I don't necessarily think that George Galloway took all of those, accrued all of his votes just from the Labour Party. I suspect there will be some other people in the constituency, people who have made previously have voted Tory, who swung towards him. He has a particular kind of unique selling point, doesn't he? And you know, has always been very, very consistent on the whole Brexit question, which I would imagine kind of endeared him to a lot of people in that constituency. So certainly the majority, but not all.
And the anti-woke agenda. I mean, there are some things that were done by the Galloway campaign. He, by the way, denies them, but some things done by supporters of George Galloway that will look pretty appalling to us. But what I thought was interesting about the Galloway campaign was it was an anti-woke agenda. And I just wonder, Tom, whether that did take a few working-class Tory votes.
Do you know what? I would entirely not be surprised if it did. I spent an afternoon with George Galloway earlier in the week on top of his campaign battle bus. And it was interesting. Sitting on top of that bus, he had supporters of his waving England flags, driving through working class areas of the constituency, blasting out 3 lions from megaphones. and as that song played, George Galloway would shout over the top of it, 3 lions on a shirt and 1 lion in Parliament, fighting for Batley and Spen. And I just wonder that combined with the leaflets he put out saying that he was pro-Brexit, that he was all of these things.
Which he was.
Put out, exactly, and put out in working class, white working class areas of that constituency, as well as its big ethnically diverse population. Like there are still considerable white working class areas. And I wouldn't be surprised at all if he picked up a considerable number of votes there.
No, it is interesting. And I have to say, also very interesting, it's the first insurgency we've seen for at least a couple of years. The Brexit Party nearly won the Peterborough by-election. Since then, English politics has been back to business as usual in many, many ways. And suddenly there's an insurgency. Galloway gets 8,000 votes, 22%. It is an impressive performance in a by-election when you're up against the big party machines. I know, I've been there many, many times. And I just wonder how much of a problem this perhaps causes for Keir Starmer. Dan Hodges, writing in today's Mail on Sunday, kind of speculates and says, look, Starmer's problem here is that Angela Rayner was flexing her muscles to have a run at the leadership if the 300 votes had gone the other way, and that actually there were Corbyn supporters in the constituency actively helping the Galloway campaign. And Jeremy Corbyn himself tweeted, not congratulations to the Labour Party for winning the by-election, but congratulations to somebody in Islington who'd won a local by-election on the day, and didn't even mention the fact that the party had held Batley and Spen. And Paul, you a moment ago said something that I think is right, that maybe in many ways winning this by-election is a bad thing for the Labour Party because it means they won't undergo perhaps the kind of fundamental reforms that they need to be considering. What do you make of Dan Hodges' idea that basically Rayner's disloyalty needs to be dealt with?
I can understand, if there are manoeuvres by Angela Rayner, you don't expect that as a leader for your deputy to be doing that. So Keir Starmer may have a particular view on that. But I've described it really as this kind of war that's going on in the Labour Party between the liberal left, the Starmerites, and the radical left, is a bit like two bald men fighting over a comb, really, because whoever wins that battle, if they try and take the Labour Party in their direction, they're going to find actually it's not much of a useful instrument for them in terms of winning back power and winning back the votes that they need to win back. So I think a lot of this debate is almost irrelevant. I think the question at the moment of who is the leader of the Labour Party is almost irrelevant. It's the old metaphor of shuffling the deck chairs on the Titanic. Until the Labour Party undergoes the kind of change, the radical change in ideology, in its DNA, gets away from being wedded to the concepts of cosmopolitan liberalism the whole time, gets away from just obsessing about people in our fashionable cities and our university towns, and starts articulating a programme of economic justice, but also the politics of place and belonging that appeals to people in provincial Britain and small town Britain and people with that natural kind of communitarian instinct. Until it starts speaking that language, then frankly it doesn't matter. All of these manoeuvres at the top of the party are completely irrelevant.
Well, Tom, we talk about this as a victory for the Labour Party, but obviously on the ground this was a huge victory for Kim Leadbeater, of course the sister of Joe Cox, who was very sadly killed in the seat a few years ago. What did you make of her acceptance speech?
I think it was quite poignant, actually, because she spoke about the need. Normally when people win an election, as you both know, you thank the police. And that's just sort of seen to be something that you do as just a run-of-the-mill thing. It's what everyone says at the end. It's a bit like the Oscars. You thank everyone who has ever worked for you, right? But she said it in a way that actually mattered a lot more. Not only because of her family's history in that seat, but actually because of the increased need for police presence during the campaign. There was some pretty rough intimidation. There were people who were followed. There was reports of someone being kicked, of being egged. There were many Labour canvassers I spoke to who were followed around by presumably Galloway supporters in cars, sort of shouting at them and heckling them. And I know that Kim Leadbeater herself was intimidated on a number of occasions and relied on the police more than a usual candidate would. But I think to some extent that might have more endeared the constituency towards her. She was focusing very much on her literature as being the local candidate, as being someone of the constituency, and actually she did better in conservative areas than the Labour Party might have expected. And I wonder how much of that was people thinking that we're going to support our girl, she's under attack from some pretty nasty people, and that sort of sense of bringing together.
And she's local.
Exactly.
So, that does kind of make sense.
And also, we must remember that sort of as everyone thought it was going Tory. It was all being lined up to be, well, this is nothing to do with Keir Starmer, this is our local campaign, it's about our local candidate. All the literature doesn't say Keir Starmer's name at all, barely says Labour. It's all about Kim. And I think that that's actually a huge part of this victory, this narrow victory, but a victory nonetheless, one based upon her as a personal candidate.
Well, I think she handled herself really admirably throughout the campaign, and I do look forward to meeting her in Parliament hopefully over the next week.